Abraham, he began to make the proper preparations for their journey. It's Genesis, continuing our story in chapter 22, verses 3 to 5, it says, he took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place that God had told them about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Man, they get together the wood and prepare. They go on their journey. And then Abraham sees the mountain off in the distance. I'm sure it's starting to sink in for Abraham the reality of sacrificing his son. I mean, any parent in here, you would much rather give your own life than watch a child die. Like, you would easily give up your own life. Given the choice, Abraham easily would have given up his life to save his son. Verse 5, he said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you. Do you know this word worship here? It's the first reference in God's word when it comes to worshiping God. It's the first reference. The first reference made in God's word when it comes to worshiping God is made here in verse 5, where Abraham says, I and the boy are going to go over and we're going to worship. But what was Abraham really saying? Abraham was really saying, I and the boy, we're going over there. I'm going to sacrifice my son to God. Abraham called it worship. That's what God was asking of Abraham. Didn't understand it at the time. Didn't make sense to him at the time. You know, Abraham equated giving God a sacrifice, something that cost him. It was going to cost Abraham his son, and Abraham called it worship. You know, I think when it comes to our worship, I believe that when we give in the offering, it's actually a more biblical, accurate form of worship than when we sing and raise our hands. Want to know why? Because that costs us something. Oh, I believe singing is powerful. I believe when we come into this place and we sing together, it's powerful. When you lift your hands, it's powerful. I believe that. But let's be honest, how much does coming in and singing, lifting your hands cost you? Abraham said, my sacrifice, my worship, it's going to cost me something. The very first reference in God's word when it comes to worship was sacrifice. It was going to cost Abraham something for his worship. I believe that when we give, it's a form of worship. I honestly think it's one of the most truest forms of worship because it costs us something. It costs us. We're laying something down saying, here you go, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you when I give my 10%. I'm going to trust you when I give to Global Compassion. I'm going to trust you when I grab a bag and a box and I take it home and I fill it up and I bring it back. Lord, I'm going to trust you. That's what Abraham was saying, and he called it worship. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to sacrifice my son because that's what you've asked me to do, and I'm going to trust you. And Abraham called it worship. Our giving, I think it's one of the most powerful forms of worship that we have. Because it costs us something. There's a cost involved. Abraham was walking in faithful obedience when he didn't understand, when it was going to cost him something. But you notice the other line in this verse, in verse 5, it said that he told his servants to stay here. He told his servants, hey, you stay here. Me and the boy are going over to worship, AKA, right, sacrifice. That's what Abraham was doing. Like, we're going to worship. And he told his servants to stay over here. Why do you think that is? I have a couple of theories. One, Could you imagine the scene that would have happened if his servants had have been standing there beside Abraham when he bound up his son and laid him on the altar and then took a knife out? Can you imagine what his servants would have said? When Abraham had taking out a knife, has his son laid out on the altar, and he has two servants standing there watching him. Because I could just picture it. I could picture them like, hey, Abraham, whoa, what are you doing? And then his servants, I could see it. I could see his servants telling Abraham, hey, listen, Isaac, this makes no sense. He's the promised child, right? He's the one who was born to Sarah, and when she was 90 years old, this makes no sense. You didn't hear from God. You just had, just maybe had some bad food, and you got some indigestion. It wasn't God. All right, just put the knife down. Let's let Isaac up. This makes absolutely no sense. Let me tell you. There's going to be people in your life that aren't going to understand your sacrifice. There's people in your life you're going to have to leave at the bottom of the mountain because they're not going to understand how God is going to mold you and shape you into the man or woman of God that he's called you to be. And if you bring them along, they're going to be a hindrance. If you bring them along too far, they're going to talk you out of the things of God. If you bring them along too far, they're going to tell you, that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense to them because there's people in your life that you've had in your life for too long that are starting to pull you away from the things of God because they don't understand your commitment to the things of God. They don't understand your faith. They don't understand your walk. They don't understand your commitment to the things of God. And they're beside your life whispering, that doesn't make sense. Did you really hear from God? That God wouldn't ask you to do that. There's going to be people in your life that at some point, you're going to have to leave at the bottom of the mountain because they don't understand your worship. They don't understand your sacrifice. They don't understand your calling. There's people in your life that are hindrances, that are doing nothing but trying to pull you away from the things of God. And you need to leave them at the bottom of the mountain.